All right. Good evening, everybody. Before we start, the City Council just met on 3 closed session items, and there is nothing to report out at this time. Good evening, and thank you for viewing the June 12th special meeting of the Arcata City Council. The City Council meeting is being held as a hybrid meeting with both in-person attendance and teleconference access via Zoom. As this is a special meeting, we will take public comment now at the beginning of the meeting and only for items that are on the agenda. If you are interested in providing public comments on the consent calendar, the budget, or the November elections, please line up at the podium or raise your Zoom hand now. We will take in-person comments first and then move to Zoom. We're not going to go back and forth, so line up after we do our ceremonial matter. So this is a proclamation in celebration of the 4th of July Jubilee, which will be July 4th, 2024, and this proclamation will be read by Councilmember Atkins Salazar.
Thank you. In celebration of the 4th of July Jubilee, whereas the City of Arcata, known for its vibrant community spirit and commitment to fostering local businesses, recognizes the importance of celebrating our nation's independence and the contributions of our local commerce. And whereas the Arcata Chamber of Commerce has organized a grand event to commemorate this significant day with a festive celebration that brings together businesses, residents, and visitors alike. And whereas the Jubilee promises to be a day filled with joy, camaraderie, and entertainment, featuring activities, live music, local artisans, and food vendors that highlight the diverse talents of our local community. And whereas this event not only provides an opportunity for our community members to come together and enjoy the festive atmosphere, but also acts as a catalyst for the growth and success of our local economy, creating a platform for businesses to showcase their offerings and gain exposure to a wider audience. And whereas the Jubilee is the longest running event on the Arcata Plaza, dating back over 150 years. Therefore, be it resolved that the City Council of the City of Arcata encourages all residents to attend the Arcata Chamber of Commerce 4th of July Jubilee on the Arcata Plaza on Thursday, July 4th, signed by our Mayor, Meredith Matthews. And we have J.D. Garcia Valencia from the Chamber to accept.
Do we dance? Yeah, grand event indeed.
And JD, you're welcome to say a few words, should you prefer.
Thank you so much. Council members, community members, on behalf of the Arcata Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to express our deepest gratitude for this proclamation. The folks over at the Chamber are doing wonderful work in our community, and this is definitely a grand event, so thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, let's go to public comment. Remember, this is a special meeting. We're only going to be taking public comment once at the top of the meeting and only for items that are on the agenda. So if you have public comment to make, now is your time.
That's on the agenda? Or?
On the agenda at a special meeting. So we are talking about budget, and we are talking about the tax, and we are talking about declaring a public election.
Wow, I was thinking the opposite, that it wasn't on the, that's our normal routine. So I wasn't quite prepared for this. I would, okay, let's go with an article that I was reading on safe parking. That's on the agenda, right? It's interesting that the article...
No, it's not on the agenda.
Budget.
It's a budget
It's a
item, so
budget?
go ahead.
Okay. Okay.
I'll start you over.
I'm just curious about this because there's an article in the North Coast Journal on this, and it gives out a price from Arcata House of $477,000. And then on your agenda, I mean, I don't remember, I read it on Friday, but I think it's like $670,000. That's what you're saying that the safe parking is costing us. And I think we've also had sessions where it was in 700 and something. So I think we need to have some clarity of exactly what this program costs, because I've seen 3 different, price ranges where some of them are off by a couple $100,000. So the other area that I would get into from reading that article is too that you know, we're sort of we're letting people, we give money for these programs and they sound very good and problems that we want to solve, but we sort of, the valuation of these programs, which we've, you know, put out a lot of money for, is sort of left, in this case, to the person who's evaluating themselves. So questions I would have on this program itself, it looked like it was a warehouse and it was a parking lot and, you know, it's some pretty serious money that basically we're not going to have that program because we don't have the funding anymore. So I would address, what was the rent on that? I mean, it seems like a lot of money got used up quickly for something that was, you know, you were proud of and successful for. And also I think in that article, they mentioned 3 meals a day. I recall one community member going out there and sort of they were a little disappointed from the standpoint of there was some cold cereal and some coffee. So there's another example of if you're going to have 3 meals a day, maybe like, you know, tell us what you're actually serving these people to, you know, that this money is going towards. You know, it just needs, I mean, and this is the basic question of all government from the standpoint we spend, I mean, California has spent billions of dollars addressing homelessness and the money just like goes and it's just a Band-Aid and there's nobody really like looking at what was successful, what programs really got the most bang for the buck and succeeded in feeding people, taking care of people, setting up goals for the future so that it wasn't just a Band-Aid. And so that's my basic summary for your whole budget in a way, is that nobody really critiques it too well. It's just kind of like, here it is, sounds good, let's vote for it, and that's it. And there's never really too much follow through from the standpoint of what was successful and what's going to help us in the future, because obviously our state is like 75 billion, I think, in deficit, so there's going to be cutbacks.
Thank you. Anybody else for public comment? Do we have anybody online?
If there are any people online that would like to make public comment, please raise your Zoom hand now. This is a special meeting, so we will be only taking public comment on all the items that are on the agenda now. If you'd like to make public comment, please raise your hand now. Nope, there is no online public comment.
All right, I'll close public comment and let's move to the consent calendar. All matters on the consent calendar are considered to be routine by the City Council and are enacted in one motion. There is no separate discussion of any of these items. If discussion is required, that item is removed from the consent calendar and considered separately. At the end of the reading of the consent calendar, council members can request that an item be removed for separate discussion. Item A is approve the fiscal year 2024-25 Senior Resource Center's Arcata Community Center application and permit use of the facilities, waive usage fees associated with the Senior Resource Center's meal and activity programs at the Arcata Community Center, and authorize the city manager to execute all applicable documents through 2030. B is to adopt resolution number 234-60, approving the fiscal year 2024-25 annual report on stormwater drainage maintenance fee for all non-tax exempt parcels and directing that said fee be collected through property tax rolls for fiscal year 2024-25. And C is approve amendments to the agreement between the City of Arcata and the Humboldt Transit Authority, HTA, for operations and maintenance of the Arcata and Mad River Transit System, A and MRTS, and vehicles, and authorize the city manager to execute all applicable documents. Would any staff or council member like to remove items from the consent calendar?
I don't want to remove anything. I just want to say, with regards to the Senior Resource Center, it's an invaluable resource to Arcata seniors, and, you know, as pointed out, nearly 100 meals are served. That's including delivered meals for those that are homebound. So I'm just really happy that we're doing this, and we'll be renewing it for, what, 5 years now? So they don't have to come in every year? Great, thank you.
All right. Anybody else want to pull anything else? We have a motion?
Well, I would move for the approval of the consent calendar, which includes A, B, and C.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion from Vice Mayor Stillman, a second from Councilmember White. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Let's move on to, oh, look, we lost one. Let's move on to old business. A is public hearing on fiscal year 2024-25 appropriation limit. Consider adopting resolution number 234-61, adopting the appropriation limit for FY 2024-25, public hearing on FY 24-25 proposed budget, and consider adoption of resolution number 234-62, adopting the city budget for FY 2024-25. And can Finance Director Tabitha Miller give us a staff report, please?
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. So just a couple of logistic items. One is that you do have a correction to the resolution on your table in front of you, and there's an extra one over there. I had an error in a calculation in my Excel spreadsheet, and so we've updated the numbers. I have also removed what was paragraph 6, one of the whereases on the original resolution, because it doesn't apply to this particular year. So I apologize for those errors. And we're going to take these in two separate items. So we'll take the appropriations GAN limit first. We'll go through the process, and then we'll talk about the budget, and hopefully you'll adopt that also. One thing I would ask is that we probably do want to open a public hearing for this, have the staff report. You can take public comments specific to the GAN limit, and then take action on it, and then we'll do the same thing for the budget, and that way it's all on record.
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing regarding the appropriations limit for fiscal year 2024-25.
I'll second.
Okay.
I'll vote yes.
Wait. Can we have a point of order?
We can, point of order. I think our finance director is probably correct that as a public hearing, we probably should, even though it is a special meeting and we don't have to, so I will apologize to the mayor for that. But we'll just keep moving through. We have one person online, but not with a hand up. So.
All right, that's fantastic. So we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So just really quickly, this is something that we are expected to do every year, and it's gone through a series of propositions, so it's been voter initiated over 3 different periods of time. But basically what it does is it sets both the state and each local government on an annual basis must go through the process of establishing their appropriations limit, and this is a sort of what their total expenditures can be. There are a number of items that are sort of excluded from it. When it comes right down to it, what it applies to is your general fund taxes and a few fees and other charges. Your outside grants, for the most part, are excluded. Your enterprise funds are excluded. So it is limited. We have always had a pretty big margin. You will remember last year, because we had that big margin, the state sort of borrowed, is how they termed it, some of our appropriation limit because they had exceeded theirs, and it was how they figured out they could get around that process. Unfortunately for all of us, they have a pretty big deficit this year, so they do not need to borrow any of our limit anymore. But it is in place to manage spending. So this is, and this is when I calculated these numbers, I discovered the error today, but it's a pretty simple calculation. At the very top, you can see we take the prior year's appropriation limit, and then we adjust it for 2 factors. One is a price. It's actually a per capita income number that the state provides us, and then a population factor. The price factor is an increase. Unfortunately, the population factor is a decrease. So and I'll show you on the next page, all of Humboldt County saw a decrease in their population this last year. The year before, we were actually the only city to have a population increase, so we actually got a positive bump here. When you put those 2 together, essentially our factor for growth is a little over 2%. So we multiply that 1.0202 times our number A, which is our current appropriation limit. The difference, which is the $919, is how we increase it. We add that to it, and so our appropriations limit for 24-25 will be $20,349,412. When you go through and look at all of the revenues that are subject to the appropriations limit, we are limited to about 14.5 million. So at the end of the day, we have a surplus or an excess appropriation of just under $5.9 million. So we still have ample room. We're not even close to butting up against that right now. I thought it would be interesting just to show you the populations in Humboldt County. And as you can see, we're the top there. And we did have a small adjustment down of about 1.5%, which is pretty consistent with the rest of the county. And overall, the county is down about 1.11%. And again, these are numbers that the California Department of Finance provides. And it is built into the process that those are the numbers that we have to rely on for our cost and population factors. And with that, because this is pretty simple, I'll take any questions and ask you to evaluate the resolution.
Okay, well, since this is a public hearing, I'll open it up for public comment first. Anybody have any questions or comments on the GAN limit?
None online.
None online? All right, then I'll bring it back to the council.
I'll make a motion to adopt Resolution 234-61, resolution of the City Council of the City of Arcata, adopting the 2024-25 appropriations limit under Article 13B of the California Constitution.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Does anybody else have any comments or all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, motion passes. And let's move on to part 2.
And then do we need to move to open the public hearing on this as
So
well?
I would ask that you close the public hearing on the GAN limit, and then we open the public hearing on the budget.
Does that happen?
I
all
move
in
for,
one? She's
I'll second it if someone's moved to close the public hearing.
so moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right.
Thank you. And so we move on to the adoption of the proposed 24-25 budget. Just a brief, isn't that a nice picture? So just real quickly, what we're going to go through tonight is the City Council goals and priority projects. We're going to go through a budget overview. We'll look at some of the programs that we are funding for 24-25. We'll look at our ARPA projects, sort of some of wrapping up those funds, the capital improvement program. We've got some other considerations I want you just to talk about, and then we can go through questions. So these are big picture, these are your goals. There are a little bit more detail in both the budget book that's online and the one that's in your packet. But I just wanted to remind everybody about how important these are and that we should be looking, and we do, look at these as we develop the budget and make sure that we're really complying and that we're following through with the policy that you all are establishing. And so I think it's really important to remind us of kind of where we're starting out. That doesn't mean that we don't have to take into account state mandates and requirements, but it is behind all of that. Just a kind of an overview of some of your council priority projects for this year. And again, as a part of adopting the budget, you will be readopting your goals and establishing the priority projects for the new fiscal year also. The homelessness reduction strategy, Valley West improvements. We still want to collaborate with our other agencies, mental health and social services. Public safety is always a top priority. Working to improve government relations with the local tribal governments, economic development strategies, prioritize future planning, implementing the Arcata Arts Strategic Plan, climate change and climate adaptation, parks improvements, safe streets, our partnership with Cal Poly Humboldt. We want to have Spanish translation of council meetings available, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then, of course, supporting our capital improvement project, which continues to be a pretty large portion of the city's budget. I went through an exercise to take the $87.6 million expenditure budget for this year and match it to those goals. And so this is a little bit subjective because it was me trying to put it into place. But there's also a lot of overlap. And what I found is that you really are matching and meeting many of your goals. And I would just, again, kind of put it out there that you may want to look at how much of the dollars are going to each of those areas. And if there's something that you want to adjust at some point in the future, that's something you can consider. But safety and livability is the largest portion, and that's not surprising because it's public safety and it's safety and comforts, and it really includes your police department. You know, you think about things that are for safety and comfort of your citizens, water and sewer services. You know, it's awfully nice to have water come to your house and then have the dirty water taken away. So that really is going to be the bulk of what we do. And it's also really the essential services that are provided. I was a little surprised, but it works out well. The environment is our second largest factor at 13%. And again, if you think about sort of the things that we're doing right now, especially in our capital projects, you're investing in your parks, your forest, and also, again, in your environment with clean water. Both your water and your wastewater projects are about making sure that the water that is out there and is returned into the system is clean and safe. And so you're making a pretty big contribution there.
Could I just ask a quick question? And here it says it's 20% is the second, which is the future educational opportunities and those kinds of things that were included?
Oh, you are correct. You're right, you are correct.
No biggie.
It's me going in order and not paying attention to my own graph. So you are correct. So the future.
These numbers, as we move through, can kind of be a living document if we decide that maybe we want to, you know, put more effort into public service or whatever that might be. We can flip these around and make our pie chart different.
Yeah, and it would be how you set your budget and how you set your goals every year. And so yes, that is, and keep in mind, there are many that can overlap. You know, when we talk about safety and water and sewer and environment, they all are related. The same thing even when you talk about health. You know, health and environment are pretty closely related to, and essential services. But yes, thank you for pointing that out. Sustainable development, you know, is a little bit lower, but that's also something that's a little bit more niche, less of an essential service. Public service is really that outreach, it's engagement with the community, and it's not that you don't do quite a bit, it's just that on a dollar value, it doesn't rise to the same level. Your health is about 8%, and again, that's going to also be reflected in your parks and recreation programs and your capital investments in those facilities that will be helpful to our community as far as exercise and well-being. And then, and as Councilmember White pointed out, future is 20%, and again, some of that, a small portion of that is the planning that we're doing in order to sort of contribute to planning for the future and the things that we're doing there. But a lot of it also comes back to those capital projects because you're investing in projects today that will last, in some cases, 20, 30, 50 years from now. And so, you know, it's really a reflection of your capital program. I suspect if we pulled that $40 million out, you know, these numbers would change a little bit. And again, it's just something to think about. The last number is administration, and it's finance, the city manager's office, it's the human resources. It's those departments that when you think about them don't necessarily have a direct role in providing those services, but are support for all of them. And you could argue that you would allocate it back out proportionally. But I wanted to just kind of point that out so you could keep that in the back.
Could I ask one more question?
Of course.
So next year, when we don't have ARPA funds, depending on how this ballot initiative plays out, this is going to change significantly.
I wouldn't say necessarily significantly because your ARPA funds of your $87.6 million this year, they're only about $900,000. So we're talking a pretty small amount. So even those dollars going away will shift things a little bit. It's the capital piece that's really driving it. And that's the $40 million or $39.8 million that really is establishing it. So as our capital program decreases, if it does, then you would definitely see changes. This isn't all the programs that we've provided and are addressing in this year's budget based on your goals and priority projects. But there are a few that I thought I would point out really quickly. We are looking at sea level rise vulnerability this year. We are finishing the upgrades to our Arcata ballpark. We've got traffic calming plan for K and 11th Street. We've got the reconnecting communities planning. We're still waiting to figure out how much money we have, but that's going to be a big project. The support for the climate action plan, the county should be moving forward with soon. Phase 1 of Old Arcata Road. We've got a full-time Equity Arcata coordinator. We've got most of that funding coming from outside in order to support it. We've got economic development strategic planned. We've got the Arcata Chinatown project, and we've got small amount of funds set aside for that. The Valley West improvements, adopting your general plan update, which should happen just after the first of the fiscal year. Your potential West End Road property purchase, we've got about just under $1.7 million set aside if that happens. We do have 3 over-hire officers approved, and this is really, it kind of talks about the next item, which is that's how we're able to add those additional patrol services in the downtown area. We've got somebody dedicated, Valley West, and then the Marsh and the Parks patrol. Those overhires really are not about being overhired. They're about making sure that through the transitions in the police department staff, we can stay at the total number of staff and the total number of 27 officers who are actually budgeted and authorized. It takes 6 to 9 months to replace a police officer down there. And then redevelopment planning for Happy Valley and Little Lakes properties. This is also an economic development piece. We've got completing the solar and electric updates to the Arcata Community Center. We did get a $576,000 loan, which will be paid off with the savings, the energy savings. And then we do also include a part-time position to help out down at the Marsh. So these are sort of big picture numbers, and they're really the highlights. We've talked a little bit about a few of them, but they're the kind of thing that if you go to, not that you go to finance department, swing digs and conferences and cocktail parties, but these are the numbers that you pass back and forth. So I wanted you all to be prepared in case you need to know exactly what our budget is. So you'll be in the know. So as I mentioned, the total budget is $87.6 million. That is a total increase over last year's adopted budget of 2.1%. The capital budget, the total capital is $44.7 million. Of that, 39.8 is part of our capital improvements program. The difference are things like setting aside money for that potential property purchase. We've got about $2 million in vehicles lined up, and we've got a few other odds and ends that are included in the total capital that are more related to equipment and things like that. Your total payroll and benefits is $20.8 million. I will tell you that we've adjusted the numbers so that the 2 labor agreements that you approved at your last week's meeting, those numbers have been updated. You still have your Arcata Police Association that has not been settled, so there may be some minor adjustments there. Inter-city payments, this is a number that is really where we're paying ourselves for services. And a good example of this is our IT services. So the IT department provides services exclusively to city departments. And in order to sort of allocate the cost of that out appropriately, we charge each of those departments and funds for those services. So really what we're doing is we're sending money back to IT to pay for services. What it does is it kind of creates a little bit of an over budgeting. It inflates the budget because you're recognizing those as revenues and expenses, and they're really a net zero. So if you think about that, your total budget would be $82.5 million. So it reduces it a little bit. As far as full-time authorized employees, there are 130 employees plus 5 council members. And then your general fund budget is $24.4 million. A couple other things to let you know. We have not included any of the dollars from a proposed tax measure in this budget for a couple reasons. One, we don't want to count on it before it's approved or make any assumptions. And it also, even if it passes in November, because of the delay in collections, it wouldn't start being collected until April of 2025, which means that we wouldn't actually even receive the money until essentially the next fiscal year. So. The budget does use $3.1 million of one-time funds. Where feasible, we are committing to a green fleet where we can take that advantage. And then I wanted to point out this last figure. So your general fund balance, which includes your reserved, which is the 30% operating reserve that you set up last year, plus sort of the unreserved amount is equal to 299 days of operations. So if your general fund stopped taking money in tomorrow, you could almost get through a full year of operations just on your reserves. And that's a pretty good, amount of money. It goes fast if you're just spending it, but it is over an 80% of reserve, which is something that it puts us in good stead. So while we start in a few slides, when we start talking about structural deficits and some of the challenges we have, I do want to just commend the council and the city on really sort of putting us in a solid position so that we're not panicking. We're not having to make decisions immediately, and we can continue to make, thoughtful processes as we go through the next couple years. This is just a real big overview of all the funds. It's that $87.6 million. Again, the capital outlay is your largest expenditure at 48%. Your personnel services or your labor is 24%. Materials and services 19%. Interfund, that $5 million that goes back and forth is about 7%. Includes a couple other things here. Debt service is almost minimal at less than 1%, and then other expenditures is just a catch-all. So this is kind of the big picture. Again, you're going to see the same dollars. If you look over on the far right-hand side, your total revenue is $84.5 million, and you can see how it works the way through. And if you go to the middle of the page, the expense total is the $87.6 million we've talked about. I don't think there's any surprises here. Your capital outlay, your personal services, all of those numbers are the percentages that you saw on the back page. You do, again, have a $3.1 million one-time use of fund balance. Most of that actually is coming out of the general fund, and it has to do with that money we've set aside for the potential purchase of property in the West End Street. That's the largest chunk of it. And I will say that if you are interested, and I can certainly, at any point, if you wanted to go in and see any of the details, we could go into the online budget tool and drill down if anybody has a desire to do that. And this is just by function, and again, it's pretty straightforward. Police are 35%, your largest portion of your general fund budget. Public Works and Parks and Recreation are large here, but it's because you've got $5 million worth of capital projects that are embedded in both of those. So if you pulled those out, your Parks and Public Works and Recreation would be a much smaller portion of the total. So, but it gives you an idea of where you're spending your money as far as departments and expenses.
Could I just ask a clarifying question? A lot of that is actually grant funded though, right? It's not necessarily coming from the general fund.
So for the capital projects in the general fund, yes, there's about $2.5–3 million that is grant funded. When we talk about bigger picture, when we talk about your wastewater fund and your water fund, it's a much larger portion of grant funded. But yes, much of your parks and your streets programs that are included in Parks and Recreation and Public Works are coming from outside sources.
And then often your parks projects will also have an allocation that come from development fees. So what we call, either recreation fee for new construction or park and lieu fees, where they are general fund dollars. They are earmarked from the extraction of that through development specific to those park improvements.
So, what does legislative mean?
Legislative means you are considered a legislative body in the fact that you are making rules and regulations for the city. Same, so that is, and so basically it takes into account city council and typically your city clerk, because your city clerk is essentially the person who is overseeing that process. So we'll move on to the special revenue funds. So you have, I think I counted 34 or 35 special revenue funds. We have some that are like our bicycle registration that literally only has a couple $100 a year in it. And then you have some that have been stagnant for quite a few years. We are closing a few of those, but it is pretty diverse. And if you're interested, again, they are online. But for the most part, these are revenues they're revenues that are set aside and legally required to be used for a special purpose. Probably your mainstays are going to be your community development block grants, and then your streets and road taxes are the ones that are sort of reliable and regular. You'll see, and I would point out here on your revised budget and your actuals in 22, 23, and those big increases in revenue were really about the ARPA funds and your Project Home Key funds that you got paid up front. It's also the reason that you have some negative spending going on, because you've been spending down those proceeds. And again, they have to be used for that specific program or specific identified project. And so it's a good thing, but it is something that you should be aware of. So the stormwater utility, I think we've talked about a few times, and the reason I am highlighting it here, it's a fairly small fund, but it is one that is challenged, and it is one that really does meet the definition of a structural deficit. And a structural deficit is basically when you go multiple years with your expenses exceeding your revenues and you're running negative to the point where you are running out of funds, and this is a fund that is there. That said, I would point out that we are in the process of a stormwater rate study. I know they're going back and forth with that, and I believe that the Environmental Services Department will be coming forward late this year, 2024 calendar year, with some solutions and some ways, and a real review and evaluation of how to sort of write that fund and what's really required to maintain those services and the MS4 permit that we are required to keep current and comply with.
Could I ask a clarifying question? You guys bear with me, I'm learning. Does that mean there will be will that go on to the water bill?
Not automatically. So currently, your charges for service at the very top here under revenues is actually it's per parcel tax, so it actually goes on your property taxes.
Okay.
And so I'm not exactly sure what the proposal will be from the consultants that come out of the rate study, but it still has to go through an election process to either be increased as a parcel tax or to end up on the bills. So there'll be a process that would go through probably sometime in spring or summer of 2025.
Thank you.
The other piece I'll add to this is that the Department of Environmental Services is going through an audit of all of our stormwater parcels. When this fee was initially enacted in the city was actually before we were even regulated through a municipal stormwater permit from the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And there were a lot of early exemptions that past council and past staff made associated with stormwater. So part of this process is just to audit all of those parcels that once received an exemption to see if there has been development since then, to see if they now meet the definition to have an exemption, since a lot of legislation has changed in stormwater, which might also help us right a little bit of this deficit.
Your wastewater enterprise utility. And again, I think the picture over the last 3 years really reflects the wastewater treatment plant upgrade project. So we're talking about a $54 million construction project, a total of $67 million when you add in your consulting fees, your engineering, and all of the costs that are involved. But you can really see in your revenues from 22-23 actual the jump up, and then obviously the expense reflects the same thing. But again, that is one place where we are very lucky that it is outside state funding that is essentially covering all of that. So we're in pretty good shape here. And the water fund is also in decent shape, and certainly has made some investments in capital programs too. I will say about half of the programs in the water fund have been funded from outside sources, and the other half have been funded through rates. And essentially what's really funding that is that you've been able to over time build up some fund balance reserves and set aside money specifically for capital replacement. And so you're using some of that, which is why you've got some higher expense totals in the current years. And so that's really a reflection there. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward. Just a reminder, when you pass the new master fee schedule in April that'll be effective on July 1st. It did include a 1.5% increase in water rates and an 8% increase in the wastewater rates, and that is the last increase that is built into the current rate study and the current approved rate structure. So that's something else that may be revisited in the next year or two. Okay, shifting gears a little bit to the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, programs and projects. And as we already mentioned, we are sort of at the end. This is about the end of the funds, and I expect that if we don't spend all of it, it will be essentially all of the money will likely be gone by the end of fiscal year 2024-25. Just a reminder, when we talk about the projects and commitments, is that one of the deadlines we have in order to comply with and keep those funds is that we have to have the funds committed before 12/31 of 2024. And so when you're reviewing the projects, and I'm going to also make sure that staff is really also on board with this, we want to make sure that we have contracts in place, we have firm commitments to programs before 2024, or that we have looked at alternatives. And something that we have used and we can certainly use to sort of make sure that we comply with those requirements is we had staff that you all had frozen back, or the council had frozen sort of pre and post-pandemic that we were able to bring on. That is certainly a valid use of ARPA funds. We have used it in the past, and it's an easy way to, if we need to make sure that we spend all of the dollars, we can certainly shift some of that back to staff, those same staff members, for a short period of time. And what I would suggest there is, if there are projects that you are still very much committed to and we want to complete or see through, we could set aside money in the general fund for those projects, and it would buy us a little bit more time in order to complete those. So that's something to
And
consider.
we have till 26 to spend it.
We have until 12/31 of 26 to spend it, but we definitely need
Wanna
written
commit before.
we need commitments that are in writing and are firm. And the one challenge too is that once you commit that money after 12/31/24,
Has
we
to be
can't
used.
move it around. So the flexibility goes away. And so we've got flexibility in roughly the next 6 months to address this if we need to.
So I think the recommendation in approving this year's budget will be to provide some authority to the finance director to, in essence, shift monies this year that we would be paying out of the general fund, if they are eligible for a reimbursable expense, to be able to get that reimbursement done and set aside those funds for the project if it's going to be pushed off another year.
And then that frees up our general fund for other things.
Right.
Yeah. It's
Well, specific to complete the projects that you've outlined at this point, because that's all you would have approved.
Yeah, we're essentially just pre-spending these dollars and backfilling it with general fund dollars is what we would be doing. But it continues the Community Ambassador Program. You have set aside $10,000 for a joint tribal project, and that's one I am a little concerned about the deadline, because I don't know that we have anything identified. We do have $75,000 in for the MIST, or the Mobile Intervention Services Team. This is based on what we've spent in the past. I do know that there are changes at the county in how this is going to operate. I don't have any specific details, so this is something that is really kind of a placeholder right now, and it may be something that we reallocate or look at doing differently going forward. We do have the outreach sergeant that's funded from ARPA for another year. We have a bike storage project. We've got Valley West Community Center project. We've got the final phase of the Public Art Call for Arts. We've got completion of the Green and Gold Corridor Crosswalks, Climate Change Action Plan support. This is another one we may want to kind of make sure that we set aside, because I'm not sure exactly where that project is. We've got the remaining CUNA contract, and then there is still $60,000 that is sort of undesignated. There is also a chance we'll do a final accounting once the books have closed, and we'll see if there's any additional funds that will be rolling forward, but we'll let you know that too. And so this, as the city manager said, I think this is an item that we will probably check in with you not too long after the beginning of the new fiscal year, just to make sure that everything is on track and we know where we're at, and also to give you some updates on statuses.
So the unspent 60,000 could be more, possibly?
It could be more.
Okay, but that's the
But
very,
yeah, it's what I know. It could be more. I don't expect it to be much more, though. We're talking thousands, probably. So I also thought it would be useful to just highlight a few of the capital improvement program. Again, we've talked a lot about this because it is a good chunk of your budget. You have 37 active projects. You've got 6 new ones this year. You completed 15 in fiscal year 23-24. And again, it's just under a $40 million budget item. This is just a breakout of in millions of what funds they're coming from. And again, it's not anything surprising. We've already talked about the wastewater treatment plant upgrade and the I&I project that is making up that $22.5 million. Your general fund, $5.1 million. Water is 5. You've got state transportation improvement program funding for a number of transportation projects at 4.8. And then there's a few smaller special revenue fund grant projects that make up that last 2.4. I'm going to highlight just a couple of the projects because I think that they're either a significant amount of money or it also shows sort of how the funding is working. And one of them is the old Arcata Road. It's a $6 million construction price tag. And we're getting a lot of the state transportation funding, but we are also contributing Measure G money, which is the previous TUT tax that was set aside for public safety and streets. So it's a perfect use for it. And I would also point out that this does meet the city's complete street policy. So another plus. The Annie and Mary Trail. We're going to be doing design work this year. And again, this is pretty much, this point, funded from outside resources is where it's coming from. And obviously, that's going to be an exciting project and certainly will add to our alternative transportation and pedestrian non-motorized ways to get around town. This one is on here really just because I thought this was a cool picture. Otherwise it's not that exciting of a project. But the water tank is being completed, and we're on the final stages of closing out that project and actually probably moving on to rehabbing tank 4C. Is it? Tank 4. Okay, tank 4. So we've got another one, but
This is our tank, and this is putting on the interior coating.
yeah, isn't it cool? And again, that funding came from the infill and infrastructure grant, and then also some, it should be water funds, not wastewater funds. Probably our most popular CIP project is the Redwood Park that you just recently opened, had your grand opening, and obviously is causing all sorts of issues with parking and bathrooms and overuse, but it is pretty exciting, and it's pretty exciting to see everybody up there playing and enjoying it. And again, it had an assortment of outside funds that helped us complete that.
Sounds like a good problem to have. It's getting used.
It is a good problem. And then the soon-to-be-open Carlson Park, which again, another big add to Valley West. And we certainly received funds, from the state level and other grant and tourism and other dollars that really made most of this come together. So it's another one that we have to really say thank you to our outside partners.
Could I ask a question? It says 1.4 million. I thought it was 2.4. We got $1 million from Senator McGuire.
Yeah, this phase is just the construction
yes.
of
Gotcha.
the
Gotcha.
playground and the recreational
the
enhancements.
entire-
Not the entire
Okay.
project.
Yeah.
What happened?
Okay, and with that, and I wanted to just kind of circle back on a few items that you may want to consider. And these are decisions that don't necessarily have to be made this evening. We can certainly bring them back after the beginning of the year. We've got a couple things to check in with you about. The first two are a grant management program and economic development program. These are two thoughts that came out of our management team meeting. And it was when we were actually talking about, and we were doing the haggling of cutting budgets in each department to try to bring things into balance. And the conversation came up about sort of what we really need and what we think is important to sort of the fiscal future of the city. And these two programs were what were something that universally amongst the department heads and other managers we thought were important. And the thing that really struck me is that neither of these are necessarily going to help individual departments. They're really about helping the whole, helping all departments, and probably more importantly, helping the city. A grant management program, as you can see, we've talked about a lot tonight already, and we have in the past, is that you receive a lot of money, and we apply for a lot of grants, we receive a lot of grants, and it is a big job managing them. It's also something that the skill sets vary from department to department. We also find that we're using high-end staff, some of our highest paid staff, to do just the basic reporting and the basic invoicing. It's fairly complex, and that may or may not be the best use of resources. The other thing that came out of this is that it's not a cohesive overall program or policy. So it's very much made up of departments kind of going after what they want, but we're not necessarily doing as great a job of planning it and strategically looking at that process. And there are departments that just quite frankly don't have the resources and are probably missing out on grants because they just don't have that capacity within the department. And so we really feel like it's something that we'd like the council to consider, at the very least identifying as a project so that we start working on how to put that together. We've also found that many of the grants, and our city engineer can certainly speak to this, but a lot of the grants actually have some funding for staff. They wouldn't necessarily cover a full staff person or 100% of a staff person, but we can get some of that money back. So that's something else that we'd like to really explore a little bit more.
Could I ask, were you thinking a full-time position, part-time position?
I think we would take whatever we could get, ideally a full-time position.
And just to clarify, when you say management, that includes not just managing, but writing, correct?
Yes. So it would be helping write the grants, it would be helping with the reporting, and it would be helping with the invoicing. You are obviously still going to be very much dependent on a department because they're the experts in their area. And so there's no way that I could write a grant specific about, wastewater treatment upgrade. There's just certain things that.
So you mentioned we may or may not. Can we decide this tonight?
That's up to you all.
Okay, I'm excited.
But one thing we could.
But we don't,
We could recommend that we look into it, that we have staff look into it and see the possibilities, and then we could bring it back to a council meeting.
The recommendation is whether or not you would want to add, staff doing research around this to your priority projects for this year and the economic development program, to your council goals. They're not included in this year's budget. It would be additional, dipping into reserves to fund those this year, and they are ongoing costs. So, but at least to be able to research that and
We'd get the ball rolling.
Yeah.
Okay.
And to identify the need. And again, it is, the grant management program would be something we would ask you to set a priority for, and then staff would work on it. And the second one, the economic development program, I think is important to consider the fact that we do have money in the budget for developing a strategic plan. So it's not that you probably need to work on that this year, but the idea being that we'd like to make sure that when we complete that plan and we've put the work into it, that we have the ability to actually implement it and work it. And so that's probably a future, which is why I set it as a goal as opposed to a priority project. Again, the other thing I'm reminding you of is just the stormwater, that will be coming back to you, and that's something we need to keep our eyes on. Mm-hmm. The next item, setting aside 25% of the general fund surplus from 22-23 is a part of your pension funding policy that you adopted last August. Technically, though, this surplus happened in 22-23, and you adopted that policy in 23-24. The recommendation is, and we can bring this back to you, but the recommendation is that we actually set aside that 25%, which is about $484,000. We would put it into our Section 115 trust, which means that we have some flexibility. The Section 115 trust is to build funds or save funds for the pension liability, and so the goal would not be to use it, But if we had a really rough year or a real dire need in the future, we could use it to offset that year's cost. And so it would help us subsidize any given year's budget. And so it's still money that is somewhat available but specific to pension. And so that would be our recommendation if the council would be willing to
And
appropriate
it's a good
that.
idea to do that, after our whole conversation we had about how we're going to handle everything.
So
Yeah.
if I had a question, and it's on page 113, would this be the time or later about item number 2 at the bottom of the page? This
You're going to have
money
to,
that we saved.
you're going to have to give us a little bit of,
Let's get through this presentation.
So it's on packet page 113, number 2, and it's about the annual UAL prepayment. And it sounds like by prepaying, we saved almost $67,000. I'm
Yes.
just wondering.
Yeah, and we
that got
did
me
that-
excited.
we did that last year, and I will tell you that it is a good thing, but I'll give a caveat here, in that interest rates last year also went up, and so we probably didn't do that much better, and we might have even maybe done a little bit better if we had just left it in a savings account. We probably would have ended up about the same place. So we'll look at interest rates. In fact, we have to make that decision in the next month. But when interest rates, a year before that, when interest rates were rock bottom, it was a great deal. And you did save money, and you weren't getting interest elsewhere, so. Again, we've still got the Arcata Police Association labor agreement to manage that might have minor changes to some of your cost factors. And again, a reminder on the ARPA that this is something that we can certainly come back to you early in the fiscal year and sort of do just a touch base on each and every one of these items. I'm not asking you to necessarily make a decision tonight, but you're welcome to.
And if not, we probably would schedule something in August to come back on that.
All right, well, as this is a public hearing, I think I'll open it up for public comment first.
There is no online public comment.
Okay, let's bring it back to the council. Who wants to start?
I would just say, actually, I said I don't really like to do this, and then I looked at everything that you had. And I don't know if you could tell I did or not, but anyway, I thought it was very good. It was interesting, the whole thing. Then I asked you interesting questions about what's happening with so-and-so and so. But I thought it was excellent. I really appreciate it. I like the format.
And the fact that it's 100% online, so every facet of this budget is available for any member of the public to click on and look at where every penny is being spent, so.
And go ahead. I wanted to add to that. One of the things that I wanted all of you to know, and even the public, is that the budget those numbers online get updated nightly. And so the only ones that really, your budget numbers typically don't change much over time. There'll be a few adjustments, but the year-to-date for 23-24, the actuals, when you drill into the reports and see, those will change nightly. And so anybody who's interested in sort of monitoring the budget over time will be able to do that. And we will probably adjust those reports so that people can see, when we roll into the new fiscal year, we'll add a column for actuals. So if anybody is interested in just sort of monitoring it and being able to drill in to the line item detail, we'll make it a little bit more user-friendly for everyone, so.
I was just gonna, comment, but I don't really have any questions, but you make our job very easy, Tabitha, so thank you. Just to agree with Alex about how clear everything was laid out and just how meeting with you was so helpful and just the way you answer questions, it's so clear and it really makes a lot of sense. I do want to just say that I definitely support kind of pursuing some of these positions that you guys talked about, especially I think that, we get a lot of comments from the public that want us to take immediate action on things that happen, whether it be public safety related or traffic related or whatever that might be. And, one of the huge limiting factors for doing anything like that is money. And from what I, hear just in conversations with people that work doing a lot of grants and staff and at cities and counties and everything, there's money out there and there's a lot of it. It's just that, and I know my JPA struggles from this as well. You can't have you can't write enough grants because there's always money for something out there. And so I think having a dedicated person on staff that can help, liaise with departments and seek out those fundings to do a lot of these projects that we want, because we talk a lot about projects that do incorporate elements that are prime for grant funding, things like affordable housing and safe streets and all of that stuff. There's money out there. And so I really support pursuing that.
I agree.
I do, I agree with the grant management program, making economic development a goal, and also the 484,000 that you're recommending of surplus. I support all of those. And yes, having someone that you really trust, it's pretty easy to accept recommendations because we know that you take your job very seriously. So it's easy to say yes to those. And I have something I would like to do more of a dive into, but I don't know if you want to go to other people first or.
Before you dive, I just wanted to thank you because I feel like I got budgeting 101 and I didn't think I'd enjoy it, and I'm excited and kind of wish I would have got a little head start, but it's always, it's a moving target. We're going to be doing it all year. So yeah, just thank you.
Again, thank you. Everything is always presented so clearly and detailed. I was thinking about the ARPA funds, specifically the $10,000 that we had committed to a joint tribal project, and also thinking about how, signage was kind of a priority that got left off when we were planning for our ARPA funds. And so maybe seeing if we could work with the tribe and using that 10,000 and maybe some of that other 60,000 to do like a big welcome to Arcata / welcome to Gutini sign, and kind of combine those two things. I think that would be a beneficial way to use those tribal funds while still looking for other projects to work with the tribe and getting some welcome signage, because I don't think really Arcata has any signage like that.
And that
That's
would
a great
be,
idea.
that's a great idea, and it would be something that would be, I think we would definitely want to do the, let's set aside the money in the general fund and use ARPA funds now so that we because that's going to be a longer than 6-month
That's
project.
fantastic. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, because signage was something that, a lot of the businesses want, whether they're directional signages along the plaza, and those are also things that I would like to consider if we find ourselves with extra funds as we're getting close to the end of December, is just more robust signage in Arcata. And then we were talking about some of these funds that we're closing, right? Some of them that just were started years ago and just never got used. So one of the funds that, gosh, I feel like I asked about this like way at the beginning of my term, was the parking in lieu funds.
I thought about that too.
And, I think that if we're just going to close it, maybe a good use of it would be to do like a parking study. Is that something that is feasible?
I will have to, because that fund sort of predated me, I haven't looked at the details of what the legal requirements for what it can be used for, but I'm happy to look at that. And I know we have allocated some of those funds that have been around for a while, where we could to some of nature's projects. So we'll see what's available. We can look into what's available and then whether or not a parking study is appropriate.
Right. And yes, again, I'm really, really in favor of a strong economic development plan, and then starting on thinking about how we can implement it, I think is great. And I'll pass it on.
So I was just, we used to have a sign a long time ago. It was, now we own the property, but at one time we didn't. And there was a mound, and we had a welcome sign to Arcata, and the cows kept knocking it over. But it was mounded sign, and I don't even know if we have that mounded area out there anymore. I'd have to go look to see if it's still there, because part of it is the Coastal Commission and getting a sign located in that area to welcome people to Arcata. So just had to mention that. And in parking lieu, we haven't used that for many years, but if you wanted to build or remodel on the plaza or a certain area, you had to put money into it in parking in lieu, because you were doing that instead of putting in a parking space. And so that went away when we finally took a district in the downtown and said you are not required to have parking on site, and therefore we no longer had to have a parking in lieu. So I thought it could go, if we're going to ever get into parking meters kind of thing, that maybe that could be used in that area. That was the thought I had.
It sounds like we're all kind of on the same page, which is nice, yeah.
So are we ready then to have a motion? Oh, she wants to dive deep.
No, so nothing necessarily to act on today, but I just wanted to share some of my thoughts with all of you and see if you feel the same and just have a little discussion. But, so we have the $75,000 budgeted for MIST. And I have, since day one, asked, like, for specific statistics, what are we accomplishing with that money? And for, whatever reasons, we haven't seen that. And that doesn't mean that valuable work isn't being done, but it's hard to justify spending when we're not sure. So I think I would love to maybe hear from someone from the police department to say, if that's the right person, like whomever I would assume, to really talk about that and see what benefits we're getting from it. We know the benefits that we're getting from the community ambassadors. We've talked about expanding them to Valley West. We've talked about like a clean streets, helping with business cleanups in the morning that our ambassadors would do. We've talked about expanding the program. And so I guess I'm curious to know, if we want to keep that, if the 75,000 should continue to go to MIST and that's, a great spend, or should we reconsider spending that on the community ambassador program, realizing that, it's could come to an end if we don't pass this tax measure. But, and another part of that program, besides that I think is important, in addition to expanding next to Valley West, I think that having perhaps the discussion of a full-time ambassador that is really in charge of the program, of, if we get too far out of the downtown, just to oversee things and manage it as we grow, we definitely want it to be managed well. And they do a great job we see the statistics, so they're very good about doing that, which to me makes it easier to want to expand and fund that program because we actually know what's happening. So those are just some thoughts. And I'm just curious to know how the rest of you feel about those thoughts.
I would love to, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think too, I like that idea a lot, Stacy, and I totally agree that I think we kind of have been waiting to hear about MIST and what's going on and who's out in the field and what that looks like, and not being billed and all that stuff in between. And just that I think that both expanding and kind of enhancing and supporting our community ambassador team to get them, kind of like the supplies that they need as well. I was recently in Chico and they have lovely people in little teal shirts walking around that are community ambassadors. And they had like a little cart that had like their trash can and like their trash picker and like some cleaning supplies. And like, it seemed like they were covering more ground, and it was just, so that they are not like constantly running back and forth and can have, the supplies that they need also to be doing the job to the best of their abilities, and kind of maybe get some feedback from the community ambassadors of like what could help, support that program physically as well. And I like the idea of definitely having like a go-to lead ambassador position that is designated. And I think those are all fantastic ideas.
Well, one of the things I've been thinking, I would really like to sit down with some of the ambassadors, and then you talk about deep diving. I would like to get their opinions. We have a report that comes to us, and that's great. But what are some of the personal issues and some of the personal things they have to deal with that we may and may not get in a report? So I don't know if that's possible, but I was thinking that maybe eventually somehow we could do something like that, and just maybe, I don't know how it would be, we'd have to structure it to be correct, blah, blah, blah. But
Maybe
I
the
think it would
council
be
could assign a
valuable.
subcommittee to have that meeting and then report back to the whole. It's just an option.
And another thing you could do is go on a walk around, because that's what I did. And if you go on, instead of a ride along, if you go on a walk around, then they're very happy to tell you what they need, want, what's going well. So you can also do that.
So, yes to all of those things for the ambassador program, but one of the things that really hit home for me was when there is a mental health issue and it doesn't necessitate sending out law enforcement, then we send out these highly trained de-escalating social workers. But I agree, without data, we don't know, how we're using them. I'd like to see some statistics and how many are being dispatched and how many, end up having to have APD come anyway or not. And then also I'd like some clarification, because right now I don't think that we have really, I know that it's been mentioned to me that we have juvenile diversion, but my understanding is they're like 8 to 5, and maybe MIST is too, and you can't plan these emergencies. But if a adolescent youth is having a mental health issue, we don't really have anything within the city of Arcata to respond to them, except for to call the Arcata Police Department, because honestly, our DHSS in, the county, they're not, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, we do not have 24/7 alternative response. Juvenile diversion really steps in for low-level crimes after a juvenile has had interaction, typically with our police department.
So
first.
not mental health issues, only crime.
Often there are certainly
hand in
multiple
hand
layering
sometimes.
issues, yeah. But the initial, response is there was a crime committed. Instead of sending that juvenile through the criminal justice system, we divert them away from that and then into the
Right.
diversion program. It's a good topic to bring up. We have 2 positions that are funded this year. We work out of the Northern Humboldt School. We work in all of Arcata school districts, but we also work in both Arcata and McKinleyville High because they're one district. We have always done that because that has been funded.
That's for the juvenile diversion.
Diversion, 'cause
Yeah.
that's been
You don't have
funded
to sell
through
me on that program. I
Measure
love
Z.
that program.
Right, but I do want to share with you some budget concerns I have. That has long time been funded through Measure Z.
Right.
That was not funded last year.
Right.
We were able to continue to fund that with ARPA funds that we had. This year, we got,
45,000.
right, from the county, just a portion of one position.
Right.
But the school district also did receive a grant to help offset the majority of the cost. If we don't have outside funding, it is going to be impossible for us to recommend 2 juvenile diversion counselors if one of them is predominantly, if half of the work is predominantly outside the city limits.
Right.
So that is going to be something that I think is going to be critical for us to look at next fiscal year. I think we're okay for this fiscal year.
Yeah.
And, in terms of mental health response, the county does have a mental health crisis that our police call probably every single week, outside of our MIST. If MIST does only work during the days, it has been sporadic in terms of when we've had staff. The billing, has been reflective of when we've had staff and when we haven't. These are county staff members working out of APD. I would say it is rare if it has ever happened that they go to a 911 call by themselves. But what is frequent is that then they will do follow-up after, or they will be out in the community, talking, predominantly with people in the unhoused community, trying to get them into services. You
But
are
they're
all
for
right.
adults, right? Not adolescent youth typically.
MIST can work across any age, and they do work across any age and with families. That being said, I think we have all seen some shortcomings in the program. A lot of it being that it's hard even for them as county workers to connect with services on the other side that are needed for them to be able to make a difference. And so the county is looking through a whole revamp of kind of that outreach as well. And I think that's why the finance director said, we're not sure if we're going to be able to even allocate those funds by the end of this calendar year to be able to commit them to the ARPA funds, and maybe needing to look at a program such as expansion of community ambassador.
So that question that Stacy brought up was very timely.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing from the council is that we're going to tentatively keep this MIST funding while at the same time having some kind of report from them, and then moving on from there to see if we want to reallocate those funds. Is that the general idea I'm getting from everybody? All right.
Yeah, and the first stats you did see was in the chief's quarterly report, and so those would be updated in this next, and we can have all of that for you by August when we revisit ARPA.
The other thing is our diversion program also has family meetings, and they have trainings for families, and they pull that together.
They have a wonderful parent project and Loving Solutions program. Yeah, great program.
All right, so anybody else have any more questions? All right, does someone want to make a motion, or do we have a further discussion?
So if there isn't any, I would like to move to adopt resolution number 234-62, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Arcata adopting FY 2024-25. And I would like to close the public hearing, but that may take another motion.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion from Vice Mayor Stillman, a second from Councilmember Schaefer. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, motion passes. Does anybody need a break before we move on to the next?
Well, did we close the public hearing?
I think that worked, yes.
Okay, thank you.
You good? You're okay, or do you want a break? Or either way. Let me know. Oh, we're good? All right, good. Let's move. All right, we'll check in after the next item. Okay, so let's move on to item B, place transaction and use tax measure on ballot for November 5th, 2024. Can we have a staff report, please?
Okay. So as you all know, this was supposed to come last week, and it got pushed, but I think we've talked about it quite a bit and gone through the details, so this should be pretty straightforward this evening. This is just a summary and a few items that I think we've talked about before, but a reminder that our current rate is at 8.5%. If we do pass the 0.75%, it'll raise the limit, or the city's tax, to 9.25%, which is currently where the city of Eureka is. It does not take into account whether or not the county is successful or puts forth a measure this fall, but we do anticipate that, and they're here this evening, so I expect that that's part of the conversation.
What does that mean? I can't follow that. So does that mean, how does that affect our 9.25?
So all it does is that it would be an additional tax. So so if ours is successful by itself, our tax rate in city limits would be 9.25%. If the county's ballot measure is successful, it would be added on to that. So it would be either, I think they're looking at also a 0.75%, which would mean that our tax rate would be 10% for the city of Arcata. It would also be the same for City of Eureka, and if Fortuna was successful with their measure, which they are also putting forth 0.75%, the tax rate Fortuna would also be the 10%.
So we would kind of be with the rest of California anyway.
Yeah, and I think you may have seen, I attached a copy of
Yeah.
all the tax rates, and it was, it ranges from the low, which is state only at 7.25%, up to 10.75%, and especially in the southern region, there are many cities that are at that high end.
Thank you for that clarification.
So it's like you won't want to go buy your car in McKinleyville if you could buy it in Fortuna, because all the taxes are the same.
There is a little bit difference on the vehicles. So most of the tax goes to where the sale happens. So yes, if you buy a vehicle in McKinneyville, the tax would stay there. TUT, which is our Measure G, and it's also what we're proposing on the ballot in November, follows the car where it's used. So when you drive the car back into our, toilet paper wherever you buy it, it stays there.
You aren't going to go to Fortuna to buy your toilet paper because it's cheaper than Arcata.
Well, and it's the Eureka, and we see this when you look at the statistical numbers. Lots of people from Arcata drive to Eureka to buy things like toilet paper. But it would bring about $2.6 million, and we certainly have lots of uses for that. And just a reminder, as we talked about the moving back and forth between borders, the tax really is pretty fluid within a community. And when we go to Arcata, or when folks from Arcata go to the city of Eureka to buy things, they're paying the Eureka tax at the higher amount, and they're contributing to that municipality's well-being programs, things like that. So it's something to consider. Just a few quick requirements, and this is why we pushed this from last week. I do want to make clear it is a general tax. which means that the use of it, while we are designating and we are committing to certain uses, it is unrestricted legally. It can be used for anything. It does become general fund funds. It does require tonight, it will require 2/3 or a supermajority of the city council's approval, which means at least 4 of you have to vote for the tax. And we are limited, as we've talked about before, unless we declare a fiscal emergency, the tax would have to go on a ballot measure or an election where our elected officials are elected officials are on the ballot, which means that it's every other year. So the next time we would be able to take this would be 2026. And one of the reasons that we are really looking at this, and we talked about it in the staff report and we talked about it a little bit in our budget, is that when we look out, you know, the city has done a really good job of laying a good solid fiscal or financial foundation. But when we look out, we're looking at budget deficits in every year going forward. And so we're looking at running into the negative. And you can do that for a few years, especially if you have some reserves saved up like we do. But there's a point when you cross that line and it's a problem. And when you're not balancing, when your budget's not balancing, at least most of the time, you really do have to make some changes. And there's fundamentally 2 ways to make changes. One is to look at additional revenue sources and/or decrease expenses. And we're kind of at that point where we're going to have to take those adjustments. And
We don't want to get into the position of where the county is right now.
No, we do not.
They're definitely having.
We do not want to be in a crisis. I think that's the word.
But, I mean, and that being said, there will come a time, whether it's sooner or later, where we're going to have to make some really tough choices about where we want our revenue sources to come from, because we will need to increase revenues. And so whether that's looking at what kind of businesses we want to bring into our, I mean, these are going to be some tough decisions. So just keeping that in the back of our minds, that we are going to sooner or later have to start looking for bigger sources of revenue for Arcata.
And that really raises the point, which is if the tax doesn't pass in November, I would probably come back to you at the first part of the next calendar year with recommendations, and I'll mention a few of the things that I would think that we would consider that we would have to start making those choices, because we don't want to get so far behind that we don't have flexibility. We want to be able to plan accordingly and not have to make knee-jerk reactions. This was a version of what was in the staff report, and it's basically your general fund. And I'm gonna, because you can see at the bottom, you're decreasing your fund balance every year from this year, from the current year forward through 2029. And at the end of the 5-year period, you actually run it negative. I'm gonna move forward one. It's the same numbers here. It's just a little bit bigger. And the one thing I will say is that the estimated beginning available is it is your unreserved fund balance in your general fund. It does not include the 30% reserve. So you still have that set aside. So again, I feel like we're coming from a strong place into this, but we are taking proactive steps to make sure that we can continue to provide the services that we believe that our residents and businesses and visitors want, but also in a very, financially structured way. So we are in a good position. This year, we actually budgeted a deficit. We probably will be close to breaking even, a little bit, maybe a little bit negative. Next year, we've got the $2.4 million in one-time expenses, and it's budgeted at a negative 2.5. And the next year, 2026, let me see if I can, here is really where the change happens. I've stripped out the CIP and the associated grant funding, and that really is our starting point. And you can see that we're at about a $1.3 million annual deficit. And the problem is our revenues are not growing as fast as our expenses, or at least that's what we're projecting out. So that's where we start just slowly, eating away at our reserves to the point where we have nothing in 5 years. And I think, there are a few things, these are recommendations that if I was at a staff level having this conversation in January with you, we would certainly talk about, cutting the ARPA funded programs probably sooner rather than later, and plan on that at least by the end of the fiscal year. We would consider the Measure Z funded programs and whether or not we could support those. We may look at things like reevaluating the commitment to a green or zero emissions fleet. We do know that those vehicles are probably 2 and 3 times their they're a great investment in the long term, but not necessarily in the short term, and they are also hard to get. We would consider, sort of placing a freeze on staff replacements and evaluating service and service levels. We would consider consolidation of city facilities and property, i.e. we may look at, see if there's things that we can sell or distribute or allocate to somebody else. And then I am always an advocate for reducing the interest cost on the pension liability. It's still at 6.8% is what we pay when we don't fund it. I realize it takes money up front, but in the long term, you will save money, and so I don't want us to lose track of that. The other thing, and as the mayor, sort of mentioned, is that we would have to start looking at how to increase revenue also. That's the other side of the equation. And a proactive economic development strategy with focus on businesses that really generate sales tax, transaction and use tax, and transient occupancy tax would be the focus. That's where the money is. That's kind of what we need, and that may look at ways to look at businesses that maybe have not been necessarily favored here in the past. Redevelopment and infill to increase property taxes, but also to pull in additional growth that would add to our sales tax base. And I realize that we have the general plan 2045 that is doing that, and that has some controversy. Taking a look at our subsidized programs and also improving cost recovery, making sure that in the fees that we can charge that we are accurately recouping the cost. Considering things like developer impact fees and other revenue sources that don't require voter approval. I know some of these are a double-edged sword in the sense that developer impact fees can discourage development, especially in housing, but it may be something we want to dig into a little bit more. And then things like the enhanced infrastructure financing districts, which is really sort of a new tool that sort of looks like redevelopment agencies from back in the, before 2012, but it's another way to add a layer of funding on your property tax based on the increased values. And again, these may not all be popular, but they are possibilities that the council would probably need to consider.
Could I clarify, when you say a number one on increasing not favorable businesses, we're thinking formula
business, things
franchises?
That the businesses that the city has codified in its code at
Right.
caps and things like that.
Right.
Yeah. And this is just a list of programs that you could fund, and I think that we've talked about really wanting to continue in the ambassador program, juvenile diversion counselors, MIST or some version of this, the streets outreach sergeant, Valley West Community Center, electrification of the city's fleet and equipment, complete streets program, homeless services, and then just making sure that we are maintaining our infrastructure. It's great that we've been able to get these grants and we're adding new parks and we're adding new facilities and we're adding new plants, but we do have to remember that in a short period of time, those actually will require additional staff that we just don't have built into the current projections. And we do.
I know that we've already provided the language has been provided, and you've included the Community Ambassador Program. And I know when FM3 did their survey, a lot of folks, or some folks, were not aware of the Ambassador Program, but I don't see it in the language. I think it's an opportunity to educate folks between now and November, and I'm wondering if it's not too late to put that in there. The Ambassador Program seems to have such a positive response from those who are aware of it, and I think if we were to educate the rest of those folks that are not aware of it, it might bring, who might be able to pass this ballot. Because it's these programs that we're going to lose if it doesn't pass. And I feel like our constituents need to hear that, in particular the Community Ambassador Program.
And we didn't specifically talk about it for a few reasons. One, that we want to be able to, over time, make sure that the programs that we're offering really meet the needs of the community. And the Community Ambassador Program may very well be one of those, but we probably want a little bit of flexibility. And I do agree absolutely that we do need to get the word out and that we do need to do some positive marketing of what they do. And to be honest, they are a fairly small cost for what they provide, because they're part-time, because they provide a service that we don't get otherwise. I would probably discourage you, but it is up to council, and you certainly can decide if you want to add it, to not change the language at this time, but we could if that was something that you all chose to do.
You say small cost, we're looking at 150,000. I
Yeah,
mean, that's.
we're talking about, that's essentially one, that's actually less than one police officer.
I know.
fully
I mean,
benefit.
it's an amazing program.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
But
that's just my,
But I do think it needs, we did find that there were lots of folks who weren't, and not a huge number, but of the people who were positive about the tax and what the city was doing, that was one that they seemed to not have quite a grasp of the program, and I think we do need to get the word out there.
Well, and if the idea is to provide flexibility in the funding, and in case, I mean, of course, we want the program to be successful, but if for some reason that's not meeting the needs anymore, and then that's just one less thing to allocate funds for. So I understand why you're suggesting that we keep the language more general.
so just to make sure I understand, so if we don't, you include that in the language and it does pass, we still have the latitude to use that tax for funding?
Yes.
Program? Okay, perfect, thank you.
Oh, a number of years ago, when our city manager, actually probably pretty close to when she came on board, she really looked at the entire city and tried to consolidate things and reduce expenses. And so now it really feels wonderful to have the opportunity to fill some of the gaps that we had with staffing, et cetera. And I really appreciate what you did, Karen, when you scrunched everything down and looked around and we were going, oh my gosh, and everybody was carrying a bigger load. And gradually we've been able to change that.
That was our crisis moment. So we have built up, and I don't want to see you go there again.
We're doing that, and then it's allowed us to see the difference in being able to come back closer to what we should be having to run a city our size.
All right, does anybody have any more discussion on this agenda item?
This is just the language that is in your packet in the resolution, and again, unless you wanted to make some changes to it. And just a reminder that you did have 72% support for this from FM3 research, and so we really want to carry that forward. That's a pretty good number going into putting it on the ballot and potentially elections.
I noticed on F on here, it says authorizes the city council or any member or members of the city council to write the argument for the measure, and. Isn't that the next thing?
So we have a little bit.
Okay, I'm jumping to the
No,
next
and
one.
actually, it is, I will tell you, there's a little bit of duplicate between my resolution
Okay.
and the city clerk's resolution, and it was partly just wanting, I probably overstepped, I'll just say that, by wanting to make sure that it was all covered, and I didn't miss anything. So I think in the next agenda item, it's more specific to who's probably appropriate to be on that committee than the generic language that I included. So I don't think you need to take that action.
So if we're ready, I would move to adopt resolution number 234-52, which places a 3/4 of 1 cent addition to the city's transactions and use tax measure on the ballot for the general election to be held November 5th, 2024.
I will second.
Okay, we have a motion from Vice Mayor Stillman and a second from Councilwoman Schaefer. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, motion passes. How are we doing? Anybody need a break? Or can we
I'm
keep?
doing great.
Okay,
Oh, my mic.
let's
Okay.
take a 5-minute break.
You want to take one?
Yeah, we're going to take
That
one.
makes Public Works out there.
If we're all ready to come back, let's come back. The show on the road. All right, we're coming back.
Unless you're running back.
You know what that was regarding?
Oh, yeah.
I was like, holy hell.
You could have watched like the first couple innings of the Crabs game maybe and gotten a hot dog. All right. Our next item for new business is to adopt resolution number 234-57, calling for a general municipal election to be held November 5th, 2024, and consider appointing a subcommittee to draft arguments in favor of the transaction and use tax TUT measure. Can we have a staff report from City
Yes,
Manager Deemer?
thank you. Part of the role of local government is to establish policies that ultimately conduct our municipal elections. So in preparation for November 5th, 2024, staff has prepared Resolution 234-57, which establishes that process and then requests that our general municipal election be consolidated with the statewide general election, which is administered by Humboldt County. Our November ballot will elect 3 council members, each for full terms, and will consider the ballot measure calling for the 0.75% of 1% sale TUT measure that you just passed at your previous item. Tonight, it's recommended that the City Council adopt resolution number 234-57. Please read the whole title when you do. And if you agree to appoint a subcommittee of 2 council members to draft the primary argument in favor of the transaction use tax ballot measure, and then if needed, a rebuttal argument following the election's scheduled deadlines. And I might be happy to lay out those deadlines and if you want to walk through them, but I think if we can call for the election, then that I can work with that subcommittee.
Sure. Tabitha, were there other people interested in being part of that subcommittee? People from the...
So I know that we had one volunteer from the Energy Commission, and then we had a couple that were interested originally from the TUTOC committee that were interested in participating, and I didn't reach out to them, but we could. So if you wanted staff to take that role and see if anybody else is interested in joining council, we certainly can do that, and it might be a good way to get a few more people involved.
Sure, and I think that time is kind of the essence
Absolutely.
at this point. So I think that, I'm sorry, go ahead. Anybody else have any? I'm happy to do it. I feel like it's my job to be part of that subcommittee. If there's 2 people, if anybody else is wanting to be part of that subcommittee.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't think that me, Alex, or Stacy should do it because we are already gonna be on the ballot in that election. I don't know, something about that doesn't seem right to me. And Stacy and I did our last one, and Alex has probably done a million too. So, I think to let Kimberly and Meredith get some experience doing this and being part of it would be a great idea.
So, but I also wanted to encourage.
Unless you don't want to, but.
Because in the past, the TUC, or however you want to say it, TUT, several people on there have worked on ballot measures before and the wording. And it would be nice if those people are interested in helping this time too, because they've had that
absolutely.
experience in the past.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I'm willing, if it only needs to be 1 council member and those 2 talk people, and I think it was Michael Winkler, then I'm fine to work with those people. If Councilmember White wants to be a part of that, I'm thrilled to have her along. It is up to you.
And I would add that even though it is an election year, it's up to each of you individually. They can, arguments in favor can have up to 5 signatures. It has been customary for the entire council to sign them in the past, so that's something that you'll consider at your July meeting. We would want this prepared and coming back to you for your July 19th meeting.
So the last one we had, when we did Measure G, no council member signed that. I went around and I got different people in the community, trying to get a wide group of people from different areas, avenues of life to sign it, because I thought that was more effective than the council signing it. But we can do whatever, but I'm just suggesting that.
Yeah, and so I think that in this resolution, we are going to consider appointing a subcommittee, so I say we consider appointing a subcommittee, so let's, somebody make a motion.
I will make a motion to adopt resolution number 234-57, calling for a general municipal election to be held November 5th, 2024, and appoint a subcommittee of Mayor Matthews and interested committee members, and Councilmember White if she wants to draft arguments in favor of the transaction and use tax measure.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Councilwoman Schaefer, second by Mayor Stillman. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Motion passes. Now we can move on to receive a report from the County of Humboldt and provide input to the county to share Arcata's prioritization of essential services in an era of natural disasters.
All right. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Sean Quincy with the County Administrative Office. And I feel like I came in on a kind of a treat of an agenda for you all with the budget and the sales tax measure, because I am one of those people, as Ms. Miller talked about, who goes to those financial conferences and goes to the shindigs afterwards, and we talk about general fund and total personnel and cost allocation plans and things like that. So I feel at home in this conversation. But before we get into our presentation, this is my first time addressing this body, and so I just really quickly want to introduce myself and then get into kind of why we're here. But originally I'm from San Diego, moved up here in '02, went to formerly what was Humboldt State, studied early childhood development and journalism, came out and worked at a couple of the newspapers, Times Standard, Eureka Reporter, while also working in early childhood. Started at the county in 2012 in communications, have moved on to working on more policy and management issues. Worked on Measure Z back in 2014, the renewal, Measure J, the TOT increase, and so some additional local revenue measures there. But it gives me a chance to work with fine folks like your city staff and several of you on some other issues, and Director Tom Matson on a few other issues. So I give Tom a second to introduce himself as well.
Yeah, I'm currently Director of Public Works for the county. Like Sean, I came up here in 1986 to go to Humboldt State to get my engineering degree. I'm currently chair of the Engineering Advisory Board for Cal Poly Humboldt as one of my side gigs. I went down south for a couple of years, back to the San Francisco Bay Area, and then as soon as SHN had a job opening in 1992, I jumped back up here, worked with them a couple of years, ran the landfill for Recology for a few years, and then jumped over to the county as Deputy Director of Roads and became Director in 2005, and 19 years after that, I'm still here.
And things have been getting progressively better. Okay, or not. But the reason thank you for that. But the reason we're here today is to talk about kind of how things have progressed, as Director Matson kind of alluded to, and where we are now, where we could be heading to into the future, and specifically in terms of natural disasters. And over the last 10 years or so, we've seen an increase in the number of natural disasters that are hitting our area. These disasters vary from storms and landslides, as we saw down in Fleener Creek a couple months ago, earthquakes, snowstorms. It just runs the gamut. These disasters are sometimes localized, but sometimes they hit our entire community. But we're seeing that they're increasing in frequency and intensity. And when these disasters happen, along with the city, the county will proclaim local disasters or local emergencies. Less frequently, the state and the federal government will proclaim emergencies. The reason that's relevant is because if the state and the federal governments declare disasters, that opens up funding channels and for us to reclaim some of those costs. But if those disasters are not declared at the state and federal level, those funding channels are cut off, and we're left to bear the cost of those emergencies that are not of our own doing. But these disasters, these rolling disasters, are starting to take a heavier toll on the county government. And at the same time these are happening, we still need to find ways to deliver the essential services that our community needs, as you guys have been talking about all evening. And to talk a little bit about how we got here, our story begins with, at least from the county government's point of view, it begins with looking at the state. Because over the last 30 plus years, the state has taken more than $500 million from the county's general fund. And this is not hyperbole, it's not funny math, these are reportable numbers. Back in the 90s, if you remember, the state could not meet its obligations. And so it changed the way that local property taxes were allocated. And so it shifted our property taxes to take care of state obligations. And as I mentioned that, I don't feel bad about talking about something that happened way back in the 90s, because our infrastructure was created well before that, and our local needs and the way we address those local needs were created in such a way that local property taxes were meant to take care of those local needs. And when the state outspent themselves, they dipped into local governments to take care of their own needs. And so we're still fighting that battle back here 30 plus years later. And so that number, we tally that number every year, what that diversion costs. And in the current year, 23-24, that amount that diversion equals is more than $25 million. That's $25 million that would have otherwise been in the county's general fund to take care of local needs. And that doesn't include some of the state mandates that staff mentioned tonight. And it doesn't include future state takeaways. As you all are well aware, the state is facing a record deficit of between $37 and $73 billion, depending on who is counting the numbers. And we find ourselves in an incredibly defensive position right now, trying to protect from future state takeaways. The governor's May revise from a few weeks ago had hundreds of millions of dollars in cuts to local emergency preparedness and transportation programs. And so this is how these things happen. When the state finds itself in a bind, one of the first places that it goes is to dip into local governments and redirect, shift money. If you look at all the proposals, there's a lot of this redirect and shift that you'll find in there, and we worry about that because that's shifting money away from local governments to take care of our local needs. And so we're not the only ones who are recognizing our need to do more in terms of local disaster preparedness. The grand jury last year, I believe it was in June, issued a report that said in no uncertain terms that the Humboldt County and the county government itself needs to do more to prepare for natural disasters. It's because of our seismic, the way our topography is, our inclination for bad storms, and because sea level rise is exacerbating, or climate change is exacerbating the impacts of sea level rise on our community. And so I mentioned the grand jury's report from last year because the grand jury is an independent body who is making a public statement to our local community and our local leaders saying that we need to do more. And so what we're doing now is an attempt to rectify that. And I kind of, earlier in my presentation, I meant to be to address this issue, and I wanted to be upfront with this council and this community that one of our ways to rectify this issue or begin to help us prepare better for natural disasters is by placing a revenue measure on the ballot in November. Staff alluded to it a little bit earlier, but that is one of the things that we are heavily considering. We considered doing that in March, and our board has directed us to do some more research and to potentially place something on the ballot in November. So you all likely received a fine piece of mail sometime last week asking you all to take a survey and identify what your priorities are. And that was part of this education effort that we're embarking on right now. So to continue on, if I could leave this council with one thing, it's that we simply believe that natural disasters are an everyday part of life for Humboldt County now. And what that means for us is that we need to reorient the way that we deliver public services in the light of this new reality. And for the county government, we're seeing the impacts of these natural disasters mostly on our roads. Tom can talk a little bit more about what these disasters mean for our roads, but one thing that we need to do is that we need to harden our roads. And I mentioned that in the context of state and federal reimbursements. When we get state and federal reimbursements, that doesn't cover the full cost of our natural disasters and the activities that we need to take in response to natural disasters and repairing our roads. But I'll let Tom talk a little bit more about why that is and kind of the state of our roads now.
So yeah, I'm going to mainly focus on the roads because without roads, you have no disaster response. So if we look back, when I started with the county in February 1998, that March was my first declared disaster working for the county on floods. I wondered what I got into, so I looked at the past 20 years before that, and we were on average getting a federal declaration about once every 3 years, spread out over time because many years, if we get a storm disaster in December, there's an 80% chance we're going to have another one in March. That's just the way our winters roll. So that was livable. Then comes 2017. We got hit with $41 million of damage to the road system, followed 2 years later by another $15 million. And from 2022 to 2024, we have actually 5 disasters, 3 federally declared, 1 state declared, and 1 local disaster that we're operating under. And that's hit the roads department to the tune of about $70 million. My annual revenue is about $15 million. And where it creates the problem is FEMA does not pay to harden the road system after a disaster. They pay to put it back the way it was. Well, if it failed the way it was, it's bound to fail again. There are ways, but they're very few to get additional hardening, which we've done. But we have repeat sites that are repeat sites that are repeat sites that are critical locations in the county to get supplies and people and food and everything else. And so I'm having to take my maintenance money and pay, because FEMA doesn't pay up front. I have to pay for this right out of my local funding. So that takes away from the maintenance. And then it takes me 6 to 10 years to get reimbursement. So right now my road fund budget is actually a negative 10 million and it's being floated by the county tax treasurer because they know I'm going to get money hopefully eventually, but it puts me in a position where I'm having to cut maintenance. Our maintenance I'm sure you all know what a pavement condition index is. I'm sure Natra's presented to you on that. We were in the 60s going into 2017. We're now down to 49. And if we don't make changes in our funding stream and our ability to do things, we're projecting to go down to 23 in 10 years, which is basically most of our rural roads are going to start getting converted back to gravel. And so that's the vicious circle that we were in. We get the damage. We have to front the money. We don't have the money to harden the system. We defer maintenance. We get more damage. And as we said, when I look at it, it's just like 7 disasters since 2017 and 1 every 3 years history before that. Things are changing. We're getting hit harder and we're not able to keep up with it with the county infrastructure.
And one point that I'd like to stress to this body, when Tom mentions the PCI index on a scale of 1 to 100, and so 69 is kind of average, and going down, we're well below average. There are 6 counties that are in what's considered a good range, 70 and above, and each of those 6 counties have individual local revenue measures. Some of them have multiple local revenue measures dedicated to roads, and so it's no surprise that additional local funding means better service on the roads.
And that 70 number is magical because that's where you're basically re-roofing your house before your house collapses. Our house is collapsing. It's a lot cheaper to maintain a road system that has a high PCI than it is to rebuild entire road systems where we're getting to.
And so this leads to the,
Is it okay to ask a question?
Well, I think he's almost finished, so why don't we...
Okay.
we're happy to answer any questions as you'd like.
You're talking about hardening roads. Could you explain what that means?
That means putting in better retaining walls. That means a lot more rock slope protection. That means rerouting roads where we can't do things to tie into a better geography. A lot of the county's roads are the old wagon trails. They were never designed. They were just pushed in wherever it was easiest to get through and then easiest to maintain at the time, which basically meant pushing dirt into the river because they followed the rivers or the ridges. And so hardening them means making them resilient to the rainfall, making them resilient to earthquakes, instead of having roads on jello, having roads that are based in a foundation.
So this leads us to the ask that we have of this council, and that is, last year, as the county was considering placing a measure on the ballot for the March ballot, we worked with FM3 to do a poll of the community and determine what their priorities were, and they came back with a list of priorities. And I believe it may be in the packet tonight or not, but it was definitely on the mailer that you all received last week. There was a list of, I think, 7 or 8 priorities. And it's a really disparate list of services ranging from homelessness services to transportation to roads and 911 response. But right now, because our funding is so limited, we need to get really granular on what the community really wants. And so we want to know what the highest priority is among these higher ranking priorities. And so the ask of this council and this community is to weigh in and go to our website and take the survey and let us know what's important to you. You can provide additional comments and things like that. Later this summer, we're a little bit behind you all in terms of developing our revenue measure for the ballot in November. But we'll be doing another scientific poll where we call about 600 likely voters and really get kind of a scientifically backed idea of where people's residents' priorities are. But we would like the community to take this poll now and let us know among these priorities what's their highest. The second ask that we would have of this council and this community is if there are other community groups within Arcata that you think would be a good fit to hear this message and ask questions of us, to let us know so we can go out and talk to those groups. We're more than happy to go out and talk to folks about this and the impacts of natural disasters and where we're going in the future. But with that, we are happy to answer any other questions that you might have. And thank you for your time and thank you for having us.
I just want to remind folks, because disaster related, and maybe an opportunity for you to share is July 12th through the 14th, the Arcata CERT Community Emergency Response Team will be doing a training. So there will be 30 plus people, and then of course everyone that they know they can share, maybe, I don't know. I was going to ask you, because I didn't receive that survey, so thank you for directing me to the website, and I will commit to take that survey. I guess we can't count on the feds. We found this out when we had our December 2022 earthquake, when Rio Dell got hit really hard, and they're still dealing with the aftermath of that. If it wasn't for boots on the ground like Nick Brown Crawford and bringing in the World Kitchen and other programs, they'd be a lot worse off. But this ballot measure will fill in that gap. So that, I mean, if it is claimed a federal national disaster, that's great. Then we can put that money back in and use it somewhere. You can pay yourself back if they come in, but if not, they're still suffering. And if we had that FEMA funds, or in this case, the ballot measure, things would already be taken care of there. So thank you for sharing this.
Yeah, thank you for that, council member. An example from the Rio Dell earthquake was there were a number, I think there were over 100 structures that were either yellow or red tagged, and those families couldn't go back into those homes. And so we needed to provide funding for some of those families to go live in hotels for a while until the homes could get repaired. And that funding is, we're still looking for reimbursement for those funds, you know, almost 2 years later. And that's local funding that was spent to do that. Luckily, we had some ARPA money to spend on that. But that's another example of some of these local needs that may or may not get reimbursed, that we need to take care of our local community.
Just some thoughts to, I don't know, share with everybody and share with you guys. But I think that, and I haven't seen the survey yet or taken it, but thank you for directing us to that. But I think it's really smart to take, you know, this lens of disaster preparedness and bringing in, you know, the idea of climate change, and that, you know, we are living in a reality where we are only going to see more extreme weather, more extreme storms, and that literally our infrastructure cannot handle it. And I think that coming at, you know, a measure this way, especially looking at what communities, right, countywide are going to be voting on it. And we talked about how Fortuna is going to have a tax measure in Arcata, and, you know, all of this that could be competing with those funds. But I think to, you know, really focus effort in a community like Arcata that has a track record of approving tax measures and being pretty favorable to more taxes. You know, I think in my whole time living in Arcata, which is my whole life, you know, we usually tend to approve tax measures, and at least since I've been a voter, you know. And so to kind of take some of those priorities, especially in Arcata, where talking about climate change and mitigating disasters is definitely a higher priority, probably for a lot of the voters than maybe in different parts of the county, where there might be more conservative viewpoints that do not take the, you know, importance of climate change into account. I think that, you know, that is a good viewpoint to take, and I appreciate, you know, just the thoughtful presentation on that. And, you know, because to focus that it is a different type of service than, for example, our sales tax would be, you know, necessarily. There's definitely some overlap, but to focus in on that. And so thank you guys for your presentation tonight. And I think that, you know, you've got a good beginning starts here. So yeah, looking forward to taking the survey as well. Oh, sorry. One other thing I forgot. And then thinking of that too, just as far as like groups to liaise with and present to, I mean, I think that especially in Arcata, like our business community is pretty active, and to, you know, reach out to the Chamber of Commerce and be able to like talk to those businesses about how it will impact them, but to you know, be able to generate some of these positive ideas around what the tax would be going to. And then we're going to Stacy.
And I might have already said this when you guys presented at the CERC meeting, I don't know, so I apologize if I did. But what would be helpful to me and probably others that will have, you know, friends, family members, community members asking us about this measure and like if they should support it or why, some type of a one-sheeter with some of the information you provide, especially regarding the roads. Like what you said is very powerful because you're talking about, you know, facts and numbers and some history. And so I think if we had some of that information at our fingertips when it gets time to start talking about this, we just need some cheat notes to help you out, is what I'm asking for, I guess.
Yes, yeah, no, we're definitely in the process of developing that.
Cool.
Yeah, I can say from personal history, I lived in Orleans for 10 years. I know what a disaster those roads are, and being stuck behind like rock slides and whatnot. So it's super important. I do think that keeping this in a very broad lens of climate change is probably important because, unfortunately, but honestly, like none of the tax, if it goes to roads, is going to really go to Arcata. These are all like county districts. And so I just want to make sure, because we have a very important tax measure on our ballot too, that we are capturing a kind of what's in it for us as well, because, I mean, I had to say it, I'm sorry.
We're all in this. We're all in the same boat. I mean, we had long discussions because we knew other people were going forward, but we can't not do anything.
And if you want to go somewhere else than just in Arcata, you may have to take one of your roads if you aren't on a Caltrans road. And so that might be, you know, for citizens. I would suggest you hit the rotaries in Arcata. Sunrise and noon.
And it's funny you mentioned that because in 1964, the only way into the county was Bell Springs Road, which is a county road from Mendocino to Humboldt County.
Or you flew in, because I worked for the airlines, and all the planes just had boxes in the seats, and all over the airport, everyone's sleeping because they couldn't, all over the floor, they couldn't get here.
Yeah, my in-laws' entire house was moved because of the 64 flood down in Orleans, so yeah, it's a whole thing. Anyway, thank you so much. Please reach out to us if there's anything else we can do to help you, and if there's no other questions. Thanks for...
And thank you for explaining hardening, because all we hear about it is from fire point of view, where you're getting rid of the vegetation around your house and you're doing this and that. But hardening roads is, I'm glad you explained that. Thank you, Tom.
And if I might just add as a final note, and thank you again, to the point of different jurisdictions placing measures on the ballot, what I began the presentation with on the state takeaways affects cities too. You know, that property tax reallocation, that hits cities too in a big way. And so when we hear that cities are putting sales tax measures or local sales tax measures on the ballot, our response is we get it. You know, we understand that there's not enough funding to take care of local needs, even at the county and the city. And Councilmember Schaefer, to your point about the climate change piece, I would say that there's shared interest throughout the county around doing our part to whatever extent we can to reverse the effects of climate change or neutralize them, or do what we can, especially in terms of public transportation. You know, the public transportation system here, bus service, especially for seniors, disability, and low income, we need to make sure that service is guaranteed for those who need it. And so that's a big emphasis in this measure too. And that's to the point of taking a climate effort, some climate action as well. But thank you again for having us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
So, following up on what Stacy said, and you get that sheet, you should really make sure it's available for everyone that represents people on HTA, Humboldt Transit Authority, because you're now talking about the roads, and probably HCOG also. Well, I think you should look at all the joint power agreements and make sure everyone in joint power gets it, because there are different representatives on each joint power.
Mm-hmm.
So that way you could cover at least the council members. Thank you.
Can expect it in your inbox soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you so much.